Good evening, folks, and welcome to the fifth presentation for the 2022-23 Avalanche Canada webinar series. My name is Brent Strand. I'm your producer for the evening. Amy Irving's in the online back moderator, looking out for your questions, putting some web links in our chat box. Thank you for joining us tonight again. Over the last 2 years, we presented a variety of webinars and found that being online means we get to share our avalanche safety messaging with even more of you than before. We're glad you're with us this evening, and we'd love if you folks could share this with your friends out there throughout the winter. Our mission is to help educate backcountry users so you can go out and play safe. We want you all to know more, go farther, and come home. First, we'd like to acknowledge that our session is being hosted in the territory of 4 nations, the Sinnix, the Secwepemc, Kanaha, and the Silks. As a national organization, we also acknowledge the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit nations whose lands we live and recreate on. So before we start tonight's session, I'd like to talk about our sponsors. We're super grateful for our sponsors being loyal in their support for us during these challenging economic times and working with us to reach backcountry users this winter. Tonight's webinar is sponsored by Garmin. Garmin has supplied our field teams with inReach communication devices for years, and we're thrilled with their ongoing commitment to avalanche safety. A couple housekeeping notes. Everybody's muted automatically in the session tonight. There's going to be an opportunity to ask questions, and to do so, you can just click on the little raise hand icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen there. I'll unmute you. You can ask your question to the presenter, get a little interaction, and then I'll mute you back up. Another way to ask is to type it in the Q&A box. It's also found at the bottom of your screen. And please use the Q&A. It's easier for us to track those questions in there rather than going into the chat box. In the chat box, that's going to get populated with web links and stuff like that. So questions make it really good. So keep them in your head. Grant's going to do some stuff here and then we'll talk about it later. Off the line, that's tonight. Have you ever been at the top of a line? Haven't planned it for days, checked the weather, the snowpack, you've done the assessments, you're on your way up. You get to the top and you're wondering, are we making the right decision? Because it can be a very fine line. If conditions are touchy, you know, about where to ride safely or where not to ride at all. Tonight's presentation will delve into details on what you should think about throughout that day to keep constant awareness of the changing conditions, or to keep your mind open to the plan B that you might have in your back pocket that you hopefully are prepared for before setting out. Our presenter tonight is Grant Helgeson. Grant's been an Avalanche Canada forecaster since 2011 and now holds the position of our product manager at Avalanche Canada. He helps develop the many excellent web resources and apps, and the latest greatest so far being the new flexible forecast regions on our map and the many apps that are attached to that update. This keeps him super busy, but hopefully he will find time to share a few lines this winter. And really appreciate Grant for allowing us to have some of your time tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Grant, and I hope you folks enjoy the presentation tonight.
Hey, thanks so much, Brent. Really appreciate that. Just going to get a few things queued up here. And we're going to share this. Okay. Are we free of black boxes? Are we all good?
No, you got a couple black boxes there. It's like they're slowly going away. You got one there with your mouse. There you go.
Okay, and then I'm going to move this
one on the top bar, and it's always going to be there. Other than that, you're looking great, Grant.
Okay, cool. Let me do almost there. Okay, there we go. Off the line. This is a presentation that I was surprised to find that my colleague Ilya Storm and I built out about 5 years ago, and I couldn't believe it was 5 years. So a lot of it's still so close to my heart. And as I was reviewing it this afternoon, I was just really struck by how similar conditions are this winter. Off the line, or are we cutting it too close? Or is this the right time to be heading into the more complex backcountry objectives? I'm going to try and relate that presentation that's a little bit old now, 2017. We're going to talk about how it relates to right now because it's turbo relevant, and we're going to have some fun doing it as well. So in the winter of 2017, we just noticed there were a lot of folks who were really experienced and were having a lot of close calls. And so this presentation truly is geared towards the more experienced backcountry user, but it's got information that everybody can benefit from. I'm really curious who's out there tonight. First and foremost, what kind of user are you? Are you a sledder? Are you a skier? Have you been out snowshoeing? For me, I'm a sledder and a skier. Brent wants to throw away a poll up for us. About 50-50 sledding versus skiing these days. I'm just watching it stack up. Okay, lots of skiers, a few ice climbers, cool. About 100 of us out there tonight. Oh, and a little bit more. Okay, great. So primarily skiers, interesting. Not that many sledders, but this will work for everyone. And now, in terms of avalanche training, who's out there? Have you taken an AST1? Are you just brand new? Maybe you just reviewed the Avi Savvy we have on our website, but haven't had a chance to jump into a course yet. Have you taken a pro course? Like, are you a professional, like a CAA level 1 or 2? Cool. Tons of AST1 users. It's great. We know that's the vast majority of our users. Yeah, about almost 20% AST2, a few pros, and a few folks underneath that. Cool. It's gonna get a little bit more fun. How many days do you have in the backcountry? Be honest. Yeah, is it kind of like just a few, over 50? Have you been out there 100 plus? I'll have to think of like the average backcountry traveler having around 100 days. Oh wow, kind of a pretty nice mix. It's about 20 of us have been in the backcountry over 100 days. About 20 of us, 25 to 50, and in between is about the same, 50 and 100. So like, yeah, a fairly experienced group with some folks that have a lot less, which is going to be great because we can all learn from this. And now let's get, I'm not actually chiming in on this poll, but have you ever had a near miss? So have you had a near miss with your group? Have you triggered an avalanche that almost caught and carried someone? Yeah, I've had many near misses. I've been in the backcountry skiing since about 1996. Been a professional since 2006. Yeah, I've had a near miss in the backcountry. So 71% no, 29% yes. If you stick with it, everyone there who is a no, like you're gonna have a near miss because it's a numbers game. You can't always be right out there. That's kind of the humbling part about it. I've had a number of near misses, both on my own time, on work time. It's a full-on game we're playing out there. And how about last but not least, have you ever been in an accident? I have been in an accident. Curious how many folks actually have been in one. So vast majority no, a few yes. And these accidents happen. That's what they're called, accidents. I'm going to share with you a few of mine today, and in the spirit of learning from each other. Okay, that's great. Thanks for jumping through all that with me. I really appreciate it. So coming back a little bit to that winter that we had, I'll close out of this. Great. That winter we had in 2017, we're just noticing lots of folks having these really near misses. One of those things that was happening was there was this group, they were out for a day of snowmobiling, having this great day, kind of end of the day out there, sitting on top of this ridge line, just looking out over the beautiful mountains of BC, as we've all done, as I love to do. And they were hanging out, and there were about 7 of them up there in the cornice. They were all kind of peeling away as one of the sledders left the feature, turned around, and his buddy wasn't there. He had tumbled over the 200-foot cliff face when the cornice collapsed, and it was a fatal avalanche. And it just shows how things can go from being all good out there to all bad almost instantly. This one really, I was forecasting when this happened, that really hit home for me because, that wasn't a mistake anybody thought they were going to make. It seemed like end of the day, it seemed like it was all good. And this kind of string of accidents like this kept going on. This is the Clemina Creek avalanche fatality, and it's just a quick little video of this here. And like you can just see, it's not a steep slope really underneath, but it was remote triggered from low angle terrain. The avalanche came down upon the group, and this resulted in an avalanche fatality. It was super sad that this happened. And it was just folks kind of not sure quite where they were in the remote triggering on a tricky buried persistent weak layer, much like we have right now out there. I suspect we're gonna be dealing with this weak layer all winter long. So it's just hard in the forecasting group, hard to see people out there having these kind of mistakes, which are just really small mistakes with these really big outcomes. But like, this is why we're all out there. Maybe this is more your style, just to enjoy, to recreate, to have times with our friends and family, the people we hold near and dear. We all love playing in the snow, like myself included. It has been a lifelong profession for me. It's still intriguing. I still love it. And regardless how you're playing out there, though, it's kind of a binary game. It's like 1 or 0. What separates these two outcomes? Well, it's a good question. Anybody have any ideas? Anybody ideas from the chat? Like, am I missing something? Is it like all good or all not? Maybe you can chime in there a little bit. And I'll bring my chat up here too, so I can see it as we go along. And the Q&A. Okay, well, let's see what people have as we go through this. But my hypothesis is that it's kind of all or nothing. Like, you can not be in avalanches or you can have an avalanche. And it's really kind of tricky sometimes what separates the two. And the big part of that is the lack of feedback on good days. We're going to explore this in more depth, but like, what does it mean to go and ski a line? Does that mean you did everything right if you got to the bottom and you didn't trigger an avalanche? Like, what's the lack of feedback? Were you just a meter away from triggering an avalanche and didn't realize it? Does skiing it make it a success? I think there's a lot of times we don't realize how close we've been to triggering an avalanche. And unfortunately, there's very little feedback until we trigger an avalanche. So we're going to cover a couple things tonight. Me, the average Joe, and the pros, because we all have accidents. All the right things. This was a real theme of that winter, that we constantly thought and saw these accidents, and the groups were really doing all the right things except for maybe this one small detail. And it just showed how high consequence the problem was and how it's timely, because we're looking at a very similar winter right now. This idea of threading the needle, this is something that I really used to take great pride in, and I just don't as much anymore. I'll explain a little bit more about that later. Kind versus wicked learning environments. Anybody know? Oh yeah, thanks, Pat. Having a solid plan, B or C. Yeah, that's the difference between all or nothing. Yeah, thanks. David's jumped in there. So kind versus wicked learning environments. Is anybody familiar with this? It's kind of a fun thing to explore, and why it's relevant right now in December 2022. Kind is when you get feedback, wicked is when you don't. Yeah, exactly, Tula. Good one. We talked a little bit about has anyone been off the line? I suspect that many of us have. So this is the time that I was off the line. This was a time when I was in Kootenai Pass on not forecasting. This is up there with my friend, my brother and his girlfriend. It was considerable all elevations. There'd been an electric storm slabs on this mid-December crust surface for interface, which again sounds like almost exactly like right now. We had 3 days of skiing at Kootenai Pass, and I think I was pretty psyched. Like, being a professional, being really good at this thing, like finding us good skiing, getting all the right planning done. And the skiing was incredible. And we were fully threading the needle. Like, we're just like working these little micro features, avoiding bigger terrain. I felt like I was doing everything right. I was pretty stoked. There were numerous natural and human triggered avalanches though. And the day before this avalanche happened, which is rather small, there'd been a professional involvement. So that says something. And it was the final run of the trip. That is always kind of a watch out situation for me. So this is what I wanted to do that day. Just wanted to come up through Twin Lakes, bump up along the side of this feature, and then ski out back down to the road. I was going to avoid all of this terrain. I was going to work it really nicely through here, and just keep us on this nice broad ridge. Not a bad plan, or so I thought. Last run, we jump on this thing, and I'll let 5 year ago me talk about it.
December 22nd, 2017. Started pushing into some bigger features today, more north-facing things. And this is our final run of the day here. Obviously it's a bit steeper. You can see that shooting crack. It actually comes from where the slab failure is out there, and it cuts across. You can see it in the upper frame of the photo there. Small avalanche, but given bigger terrain, that thing could probably get up and move. I'm not sure what it ran on, presuming that it was probably surface hoar. But this is why we're just taking really small bites. And we've had phenomenal skiing, but you definitely wouldn't want to push it into a terrain a whole lot bigger than this. And even this, you can see you're starting to feel a little bit smaller. But the skiing is phenomenal, and it's really all about the slab property. It's got a little bit of cohesion and stiffness, there's a problem, but in many places it's still just very low density, light storm snow.
So it's kind of funny looking back on this video now that I've got 5 years of space between me and when that was taken. Like, it got bigger in a hurry there. That feature that we were skiing into had a touch more wind, and like with a slab that you can kind of look up and even see in the rest of that's in this video right now, the upper right, like that's actually like a 30 to 50 centimeter deep crown. And I just got super lucky there, to be totally honest. I shouldn't have been there. I was off the line, and I can kind of show you where I ended up at. So the red dot is where I was. I had wanted to be on that big broad ridge. I had gotten excited about the skiing, and I had moved us into the steeper part of the feature that was more wind affected, where there was a slab. Yeah, I got super lucky that day. Didn't have a whole lot to do with skill or being a pro. It was just a lot of luck. And we rely on luck, I think, more often than we like to give credit for. And I'm talking about it here because I just want to be vulnerable, admit some humility. Like, this is not the only time I've done this. And I've skied with a lot of pros, both in the avalanche industry, pro skiers, and like this happens to us sometimes. But we were skiing one at a time. So, you know, when like suppose one person to the slope, it had a pretty positive outcome, but it was lucky. So this is the classic North American avalanche danger scale. And I don't want to run you through it or belabor a point, but I really like this line here. And that it says, you control your own risk by choosing where, when, and how you travel. And that's really it, isn't it? Like, this is how we trip plan. This is how we decide where we're going to go. It's how we decide what's in and out for the day. And it's not always obvious. It's actually quite a challenging game. And I've always had this mantra that I loved. Jeremy Jones said, like, when I was just a teenage kid, idolizing what he was doing in the movies. And he said that one bad call can erase a lifetime of good calls. And this is an incredibly harsh learning environment. I made a bad call that day and got away with it, but others in that season were not as lucky. So I'm going to start touching on a little bit of this. First accident, it was a group of 10 localish folks. They rented a backcountry cabin. All had taken AST 1 and 2. They were really passionate about avalanche safety. They were regular users of our products, meaning that they'd use their trip planner. They've been using McNabb to everyone. You have a tendency to categorize things. Yep, for sure. Not all pros are the same. Skiers and boarders are not the same. I mean, agree to disagree. They're all going downhill. You have to traverse more if you're a snowboarder, but I see your point. These folks have been were really passionate. They were they're like a classic best case example of what we want people to do. Get the courses, go out and get some experience. Take an ASC2, check out all of our auxiliary products. You know, they'd all kind of had around 100 days of backcountry skiing. And it was, yeah, this is a great group. But this is what they were up against. It was considerable at all elevations. Was this an exceptional time? I don't know. In a lot of ways, it kind of looks like any midwinter day. It can look like this a lot of winters, a lot of the time. Warming, snow and wind are all adding stress to touchy weak layers. Like, this is challenging, but it tends to look like this a lot, and we can kind of get a little bit complacent when it looks like this. So this is what the avalanche problems were. They have both persistent slabs, as we do right now in the forecast, and wind slabs, again, as we do right now. So it was so complicated that my colleague Penny Goddard wrote this great blog at that time called Baby It's Complicated. And I really enjoyed this blog. It was kind of talking about how the winter had set up, where we had surface horror and why it was getting challenging. And when folks kind of when these folks went into the cabin, that wasn't quite known. We were kind of getting ready to set up the slab, and then a little bit of warming actually made it more tricky. And this is one of the lines from the blog. We've been talking about the snowpack being at a tipping point for days, but it hasn't quite tipped. Or maybe somewhere it's tipping right now. Did I mention it's tricky? That sounds a lot like last weekend to me. So here's the view. This is where the McDermott cabin is. You can grab these on our website. This is our trip planning resource. Simple terrain is highlighted in green. Those are places that are pretty well good to go. Challenging is blue or purple, and then complex is black. So what jumps out at you right now and right away is that there's not a lot of simple terrain here. So if you're going to be heading out, it's really easy in these kind of places to actually find yourself sort of in the lion's den. This is a challenging place to go plan a ski tour when it's all considerable at all elevations. They were doing all the right things. They were steeped in that safety culture, appropriate training. They'd read the blog. They'd been on our social media panels, or excuse me, social media channels. They'd received a briefing from the previous group, and they were aware that this layer was sensitive and dynamic. So they recognized this was a watch out situation. And they were doing such a nice job that they actually reduced the group size to just to 2 different groups so they could have better management, because they knew that having a big group was another watch out situation. They were doing, oh, there we go. They had spent the day carefully selecting terrain, kept the group of 2 tightly managed. On the last run of the day, they were just a few hundred, there's within tens of meters of their old tracks, and they triggered this avalanche. So size 2.5 avalanche, 100 meters wide by 300 meters long, and it ended up costing someone their life. Now, I think it's really worth noting that when you look at that terrain in Google Earth, like that does not strike me as something that looks gnarly. It doesn't strike me as something that would invoke fear. If I'd been out skiing that stuff all day, would I be scared at the end of the day? Would I be more scared? Probably not. So I think that, I've been doing this for a really long time, and I have the humility to look at these things and be like, you know what? I could have easily made a similar decision. Could I have been with a group that I was having a good time with, like out, in the holidays, just enjoying with and been in that situation? Absolutely. So this is a really tough one for us in the forecasting office, because it looks like they were doing so good. But train selection, like there just wasn't a lot of simple terrain there. They were really threading the needle. They were doing a good job of it. They reduced the group size. They were very aware of it, but they were threading the needle. The margin for error was super thin. And it's just like, we're not GPS devices. We can't stay 100% on the line all the time. I think that, most of us, and if you're not, you should be, are using tools like Gaia, GPS, or Onyx, or any of their mapping pieces of software, but you don't want to ski with your phone in front of your face following a track. So you're using your experience, you're looking at the terrain. And when you're skiing fast or sledding, it's just so easy to have the train come up on you real fast, and you can elect to get into it, and then suddenly you've got a big problem. The residual risk, like this is a real factor. Does anyone know what residual risk means? Give it a couple of quick seconds. It just basically means that we can't be perfect. Like you cannot eliminate all the risk from the situation. The classic example is having like a nice all-wheel drive vehicle. So you got a new Subaru, you've got good snow tires on it, you've got a good plan, roads aren't that icy, but is there still risk out there even though you've done all the things that you probably should do? Absolutely. Like you've got a satellite messenger, you've got a radio, you guys have your group has all the training, there's still residual risk. You can never bring the risk of backcountry skiing down to 0. And it's something that's really worth acknowledging. So what does threading the needle mean? Well, it means that it's a high stakes game. That's when you're kind of like just trying to work the train in an otherwise very dangerous environment. It's not for every day. It's not for every situation. And, quite honestly, I'm at a point now in my career and in my life where I have less lust for threading the needle. I used to love it. I used to love getting out there and just like choosing the right avalanche terrain, but on otherwise very dangerous situations. And I think that now when you see when you see conditions like this, like you're more likely to find me on my sled meadow skipping. That's one place where sledding definitely has advantage on ski touring, because if you've ever walked around on a flat meadow with your skins on, is it sweet? No, but with a sled, it's sick. You can actually have a really good time out of avalanche terrain, which I think is one of the things that I've really come to love about sledding. Saying, do you have the right experience? I think that like this winter, what's shaping up, the way it looks to me right now, I'm talking with my friends and I'm kind of saying like, this looks to be the most spooky start to a season that I've seen since I've been in BC, and that I got here in 2011. What does that say? I mean, that's not that many years, but like, what experience do you have? Can you recognize when it's a 1 in 10 kind of year event, 1 in 25, 1 in 50? It gets really challenging really quickly. Got to know when to say when. And where's your experience come from? Does it come from mostly low hazard days, mostly high hazard days? What are your tactics for safe backcountry travel when there's touchy avalanche problems in play? Do you go out there and try and find simple terrain and try and find the ways to go out there and have a good time? Or do you back off and just say, like, this is the day that I'm going to be going on my sled, staying out of avalanche terrain? Or do you go to the ski hill? Like, it's really important to recognize where that experience comes from, so that when you head out on that hut trip, that you've got a good idea of what your experience is based on when it's really tricky conditions. And I mean, there's just a lot of days where it's probably a good idea to hire a guide. Like, if you've kind of, we're looking at our experience in the poll there, some folks have 100 days plus, like that's great. But a lot of folks only have, 10, 25, 50 days. And I think even at 100 days, even at 200 days, there's times when you go hire a guide, especially if you don't live and work in the mountains. The guides are going to help to guide you into terrain that's still good. They got their pulse in the snowpack, and it's just like, when do you need some extra help? I think that hiring a guide is such a powerful tool that needs to be talked about and normalized more often. So kind versus wicked learning environments. So kind environments are rule-based. You can have repeat experiences and choose the same outcome, or make the same choice and have a very similar outcome. You get clear feedback. So these are all kind of places like, what are some things that are like this? Things like being a physician. That's the kind of profession where you can make a diagnosis, kind of, what happens, and more often than not, you start to build experience. Like, okay, you just had that finger's broken, what the treatment is, like clean it, get it in a splint. It's going to more or less go the same way every time. You get really clear feedback. It's just a really nice learning environment. There's a known range of outcomes, and you can build genuine expertise. Does this sound like backcountry skiing, rule-based, repeat experiences? So like every day you go out and it's considerable and there's a persistent slab problem, you ski a slope, and does it do the same thing? No. Some days you ski cut that slope, it does nothing. Even though it's considerable, even though it's the same persistent slab with the same likelihood and the same size. Dan Savage says, old days there were years of no bad layers in BC snowpack, homogeneous, 2 days post-storm, ski everything. Yeah, I mean, there'll be more seasons like that too. Like the coast is like that a ton. This year is a little bit different. So does this sound like backcountry skiing environment or backcountry touring environment to you guys? I don't think so. I'm gonna let Chris McNamara talk a little bit about wicked learning environments in a second here.
Okay. But the problem is you just don't get a lot of feedback that you almost died, in the sense that, say you're big wave surfing, you start with 3-foot waves and then you go to 15, now you're at 30. That whole process, you are getting held down. You're getting held down progressively longer. You're having some times where you get held down way longer than you thought was possible. Or say, rock climbing. Say you were free soloing, you would start up, but pretty quickly you'd start getting feedback that says, I'm over my head, I need to go back down. But base jumping is literally the easiest thing to do. All you have to do is take one step and you're in it. And so it's so easy to get over your head fast. And then let's say you do everything wrong on a jump and you have some super close call. Generally, that close call, it involves like a quarter second of being like, oh, I'm about to die. Oh, I'm fine. I'm actually totally fine. There isn't that like being held down on a wave, or, that rock climbing where you might just be like terrified and then decide to rappel or have to down climb. There's just very little feedback that tells you, until it's too late, that you're cutting it too thin.
Yeah, I really love that. That's kind of what inspired this presentation many years ago. It's from the Safety Third podcast. The title of it is Channel Risk into Reward. And I would argue that winter backcountry recreation is almost the exact same. There's a lack of rules. The same action can produce wildly different outcomes. Talked a little bit about that earlier. Where's your experience coming from? So if you go ski a line, it's considerable, and you don't trigger an avalanche, is your reaction like, the forecast seems a little off? It seems like I can go out there and manage these things. I can go out there and ski these bigger lines or ride these bigger lines when it's considerable. Is that true? Or were you, feet or meters away from triggering a persistent slab avalanche in a rock outcropping? Or if the fog comes in and you can't see anymore, or if your phone battery dies and you don't have the place that you know in your Gaia, your mapping tool, if you are now kind of bumbling around, like, are you sure you can stay on your line? More experience is actually not equal more skill. And there's the classic example in the kind versus wicked learning environment, that there's this wicked learning environment that has to do with this guy. He's a physician, and he's diagnosing typhoid fever at the turn of the century. And so he starts to feel like, okay, I'm really good at diagnosing typhoid, because every time that I go out there and palpate, do my assessment, and I palpate the patient's tongue, I can always tell if they have typhoid. Well, it turns out that the tongue palpitation was not where the skill was coming from. The doctor himself had typhoid. And so when he would touch the patient's tongue, he would give them typhoid. But here he is, like, he's thinking like he's the world's leading expert on this, and not realizing that this wicked learning environment is giving him the wrong experience. And I think in the winter backcountry environment, we often get the wrong experience. We're out there doing the thing, getting away with it, and then thinking that we have more skill than we really do. And this is like not just at 50 days or 100 days, but it can be at 250 days. You know, we can all make mistakes out there, and that corrupt experience is kind of what I was just talking about there. And the problem is that there's just very little feedback in the winter backcountry that tells you until it's too late, they're cutting it too thin. It's like the big settlement, or it's, you know, you see that shooting crack moving. Like, otherwise it feels pretty good. And that's the really challenging part. And the other really challenging part is that, like, getting into really gnarly places is just not that hard in BC. Here we're surrounded by incredible mountains. Sleds are really easy to ride these days. You put a pair of skins on a pair of skis, and like, you might be slow, but you can get to some very technical places in just a couple hours that maybe it shouldn't be. And it's not until you get ready to drop into your line, you're really getting into it. So you don't have a whole lot of feedback. And now we're into a steeper line. You maybe go over a rollover, and then it's just too late. So like those other sports, rock climbing, surfing, you get this feedback. Like, you start to be like, actually, I'm going to push it a little bit bigger, but you get stomped. You have to belay off something. Like, those sports offer really good and consistent feedback. In the winter backcountry, we don't get that great of feedback. And I think that's something we really need to acknowledge as a community. And so in the forecast, like,
there
what are we talking about?
There are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
And like, Donald Rumsfeld and I probably don't get along wouldn't agree on much, but I think that this idea of unknown unknowns is big. You know, in the forecast, we're talking about the known knowns. We offer what the avalanche problems are. We're talking about the known unknowns. We're kind of talking about train and travel advice, what you should do to shape your travels out there. But what are the unknown unknowns? Like, what happens if you're out there threading the needle, kind of walking that line between like safe and not safe, like just working the ridge line, and you have an injury, and now you need to get the most direct way back to the car or truck, or you have an injury, you need to get a heli back out of there, and it's getting dark. Like, those kind of factors can really complicate things in a hurry when we're cutting our margins pretty thin. I think we all like to think that we're making decisions like this mountain guide. But we really need to know the limits of our experience. And, you know, it's just really important to acknowledge that when it's sketchy, the pros actually back off way more than the recreationists do. Like, pros and guides pack extra cookies, they pack extra tea, they take longer breaks. They're out there just lapping really simple terrain. The pros tend to have pretty good discipline. As recreationists, we tend not to. We tend to get bored of that pretty quickly, and we tend to jump into the bigger terrain, even though we're not seeing any activity. We might just want to go out there and say like, oh, originally I was intending to be on only simple terrain, but not seeing any action here, so maybe I'll just go with something a little bit bigger. Whereas the pros go out for the day and they say like, no, that more complicated terrain is out, I'm not going to touch it. So I think it's important to recognize that although we all think we're like the grizzled backcountry guide, like, it's really important playing on mellower terrain. Like, there's plenty of it around. It's got to be disciplined enough to really stick with that. And I think it's important too, it's not like we're running away with our tail between our legs when we go to simple terrain. It's actually a very empowering choice. We just need to find simple terrain and make it fun. So the evaluator is a great place to start this conversation. And if you kind of follow along on these two axes here, across the X, you see simple, challenging, and complex terrain. That's what I was showing in one of those earlier slides, and I'll show it again. And then you have the danger ratings on the Y-axis. And when you start to get into that considerable and anything beyond simple terrain, it starts to be extra caution. And when you start getting the complex terrain and considerable, it's not recommended. I'll have to look up N-Taleb. Rumsfeld quote is good, simplistic. N-Taleb better. Not familiar with it. I will check it out. Thank you, Jamie. And I think the evaluator is actually a little bit, maybe we should even use more plain language, because if I tell you just use normal caution versus extra caution, what does that mean to you? I wonder if it should almost be like normal caution and green, and then it should be, when it's yellow, maybe it should be, are you sure? Are you sure you want to do this? Because I think that extra caution is something we just don't really think about that often. I think we always think that we're being extra caution. I like that Kent, he's got a question there. Who has used the evaluator since their AST? Yeah, really good question. You'll see more and more trip planning tools coming from us as we move into the future with our new flexible forecasting regions. But you can always get the evaluator out. If you've lost yours, like you can go find a PDF of it on the web, just Google search evaluator, and you can play with this. And it's still a really good tool that I keep coming back to, even as a professional. So this is another incident that we're going to touch on. This is a couple of good friends went out ski touring for the day. They read the forecast, they've done a nice terrain overview. And I think what might have been challenging is that they might have failed to recognize that these were exceptional conditions. And it's really easy to say they're exceptional in hindsight. But when you're in the middle of it, it's a lot harder. It's easy to armchair quarterback these things. I don't want to diminish how challenging it is when you're actually trying to go and make plans in the here and now. So the group of 6, one person has professional training. Some of the group is from Alberta, some others are from Whitehorse. They're coming together for this great skiing holiday. They'd read the forecast. And again, it's considerable at all elevations. This is a little bit later. It's getting trickier as the recent storm snow settles into a cohesive slab and the mid-December surface wear becomes active. With all this uncertainty, conservative terrain selection remains prudent. And I think this group thought they were actually doing a pretty good job with terrain, but we had storm slabs, we had the persistent slabs. So I guess the question to ask is, what kind of terrain is appropriate like this? And the answer may vary. Like it might be for you that you're totally willing to go out and get into the extra caution, the challenging, or the complex terrain even, because you believe you have the skills to navigate that. Or maybe you have a higher risk threshold, like that's totally okay too. I've definitely noticed, like I just turned 40 this year, and there's no way I would ski with 25-year-old me. And I don't think that I would even want to ski with 30-year-old me anymore. Good question if I want to ski with 35-year-old me. I haven't quite figured that one out yet. But my terrain choices and my risk threshold is just diminished. Like when I was really young, when I was really getting after it in my late 20s as a ski mountaineer, like I felt that, I'm totally embarrassed to say it, but like I felt that dying on some of these big lines was an acceptable risk. Do I feel that way now? Heck no. At the time I did. And it's like, we need to acknowledge that people can take risks. Like that's the freedom and the choice we have. But just know that you're taking those risks. If you're starting to step out into bigger terrain features, as the evaluator shows us, that's not recommended on these tricky snowpack days. It's not recommended. And so I also ask you, like, could you have been baited into a little bit bigger terrain if you're out skiing with some old friends on New Year's Eve? Like, you know, maybe someone has a little bit of fireball, like you're having a good time, the vibe is good, the sun maybe comes out for a little bit, like you're feeling good, you're with people you love. Like those kind of feelings don't usually strike us as something bad is about to happen, and it's real. So in many ways, snow is the easy part of this whole thing. Group dynamics can be super challenging, and it's really difficult to put the brakes on a group's momentum once it starts rolling. So this is Kootenay Pass, and the cool thing about Kootenay Pass is, again, that green actually has lots of simple terrain. There are some good options out there, but they tend to be below other features. And when it's deep, you know, simple terrain can be a little bit harder to ski because you need to get some momentum up. You actually need a bit of steepness, and this was a deep time. You know, simple terrain is probably the ticket right now, but you can go out and thread the needle a little bit, of course, by getting on top of some complex things if you feel like that's what you want to do, and it's okay. But it's important to recognize where you're headed. So this is a close-up of what the group wanted to ski. This is a feature called Missile Ridge. The highway's down there in yellow, and they were going to ski through some of this terrain. They're actually doing a pretty good job of it for a while. So yeah, we talked about this. They had a pre-trip plan, group of 6. Tracks, that's gonna be a thing we're gonna talk about in a second here. So here is what it looks like in Google Earth. And as I'm kind of looking through these things, like this is standard trip planning for me. So when you're talking about different things you want to go ski or sled with your group, like I'd really encourage you to use tools like Google Earth, like Gaia, so you can share and actually show everyone what you're thinking about. If you go to our website and you're technically savvy, you can actually download the AITS overlays for a place like this, and you can overlay them on your Google Earth. And that can help you give a good idea of like showing everyone exactly what the trip plan is. So they actually did a really nice job. They got up on top of this ridge and they skied down this slope to the lake, no incidents. And they got up to this ridge, and then peering over, they looked at, and the line that they intended to ski actually had tracks in it. So they just started to go a little bit lookers left of that, and that put them out here. It still felt like they were in the trees, like maybe they were making some good decisions and within their risk threshold. But what had changed is the tracks had pushed them out into some different terrain. They wanted to ski fresh snow. They were out enjoying themselves. They wanted to ski POW, like totally get that. And what happened is that the group had regrouped just above the crown. And as the 5th skier entered the slope, a size 2.5 avalanche is triggered. That resulted in a burial. They did a really nice rescue. They had them out in 6 to 9 minutes. They were all trained, members of the group were trained in CPR. Yeah, but unfortunately, that person did succumb to their injuries and did die. So now when you're looking at it from across the valley, like it's like, oh, this is thin and rocky, how obvious. But it didn't feel that way when these folks were on the train. Like you look back at where that was, like, they kind of thought they were more or less still on that blue line. They just didn't totally realize they had been pushed out into the bigger terrain, and it's really hard to see when you're in it. They had a satellite device that called for SAR, or search and rescue. Search and rescue responded, got the victim to the hospital. But 200 meters off the line. So they're out there having this great day. They're just 200 meters off the line. A person pays for this decision with their life. Like, that is an incredibly harsh game. Backcountry riding can be a blood sport. Visibility was reduced. The tracks kind of pushed them off a little bit. Could they have eaten tracks, as we say, at sled fun? Probably, but I can totally understand in the moment they wanted to get pushed out just a little bit. Bigger groups, I think that's something to really think about as we head into the holiday season and you're out there maybe skiing with some old friends, riding with some old friends. Bigger groups are tough. Like I don't ski with groups of more than 4, and I really prefer like 2 or 3, including myself, because it gets really challenging. Sledding's the same thing. And I think that group communications are really important too. Like I will not be skiing or sledding without someone who has a radio. Like, no way, it just doesn't happen, because you need to be able to communicate with people. If maybe that first person who dropped into that slope could have said like, oh, we're way off our line, everyone needs to actually come back over. Maybe that could have made a difference. I don't know. But if you're just sitting at the bottom of this slope, like waving your arms wildly and yelling something barely intelligible, it doesn't work. So I think what's something we can all learn from this is just like everyone carry a radio and have a shoulder mic so you can all use radios really easily. The speed of decision making too plays into this. Ski touring is actually pretty slow when you compare it with sledding. Snowshoeing is even slower. It makes it a lot easier to make decisions. But man, when you're on a sled and you're cruising, it just makes it so much easier to drop into terrain features and not put the brakes on in time. So I think it's worth noting. One thing this group did really well is they had good spacing, which is why there was only 1 person involved. What if everyone had given each other just like a school bus sized gap and then started skiing into it? Could they have had more people involved in that avalanche? Like very easily, yes. So yeah, experienced group members, proper training, read the forecast, practiced rescue, and it still went wrong. And I think a big part of that is just because there were just really thin error margins, and that may not have been realized. And that's something that we need to just really acknowledge. Were these exceptional conditions? I'm not sure, honestly. But we get so used to seeing considerable out there that we can tend to get a little bit complacent. So it's really, exceptionalism is the condition of being different from the norm. And it's really difficult to understand when conditions are truly exceptional. Like high danger, that's obvious, right? SPA, or special public avalanche warning, also obvious, that says like, slow down, seek out simple terrain, ski in balance if you don't feel like managing that kind of hazard out there, hire a guide. But I think what happened on this day was just a little bit touchier than the group anticipated. So what can we do? Well, we can build out trip plans that give us thicker margins of error. Like that's the number one thing. As someone earlier in the chat had mentioned, having a plan B and C. So like when it starts to get tricky like this, like just seek out trip plans where you don't have to thread the needle, where you're not dancing the line between complex and challenging. Like just accept that you're going to go out and try and get into some simple terrain. Just have a good day. Maybe it's a day to go out and set up a scenario out of avalanche terrain and practice. Maybe it's a day to critique each other on how to establish skin tracks, or there's any number of things you can do that don't put you out there, you're really threading the needle. So the final few slides are actually from heli skiing accidents. I'm sharing these. Yeah, I'll come back to some of these questions that are coming in because they're really good. I'm sharing these because like it's not just recreationists who have these issues, like it's pros too. I'm here talking about my accidents, just a couple of them, places where I've gotten lucky. But this is a really interesting one. So what had happened was the red there, the guests had triggered an avalanche and they stopped. And then a size 2.5 avalanche came down. The guide then triggered an avalanche and the guests stopped. But this was a line that this guide had skied hundreds of times. Like they were super familiar with this zone, but visibility was really limited. And they just got a little bit further over than they thought. And when you look at it here, like observer's right side of the photo, you can tell it's a little bit more gentle. It gets a little bit steeper, observer's left, but like, it's not that different when you're in it. So I'm just trying to stress how easy it is to get off the line. And this is a pro, like, so it's just to acknowledge that we can all have accidents. This is another fatal accident. And like you can see, the one guest just got a little bit too far off to the skier's left or observer's right, went over that rollover, triggered a big avalanche. Like, yeah, if they had stuck on the nose of that thing, it would have been all good. But sometimes you just miss the line between safe and terribly sad, and it can only be a few meters. So some of the tangible outcomes here are just choose fatter margins, choose the simple terrain when it's tricky. So in summary, I just want to talk a little bit how it's difficult to understand exceptional conditions. It's so easy to get off the line. And the real key is to take a conservative approach in these conditions, like stick to simple terrain, follow the train and travel advice in the forecast. If you feel like you can't manage it, then maybe it's a day to hire a guide so you can go out there in the backcountry with someone who's a professional. Maybe it's a day to go ski inbounds the ski hill. Maybe it's a day to go work on practicing transceiver or avalanche accidents outside of avalanche terrain. Like when it starts to get these really tricky winters, I just want to urge everyone to put the brakes on a little bit. Building out a trip plan with thick margins of error, having a good communication plan, being able to talk with your group so that if someone notices something's going awry, that you can correct it. Have fun and get home safe. I just want to touch on a couple of things right now because we were looking at a few of those scenarios from that 5-year-old time. And what does our map look like right now? Well, it's considerable, a lot of places at all elevation bands. We're talking about we're writing blogs right now, very good blogs about managing a persistent slab. Like this just feels like it's Groundhog Day to what we were seeing in 2017. We talked about the persistent weak layer. I was so psyched to see this particular avalanche observation. I thought it was phenomenal. I'm actually go to the observation here. This is a place just adjacent to Revelstoke Mountain Resort. It's called Montana Bowl. And this is a place that I ski all the time. And it's really great. You can grab a latte on the way and then you're just like up at 2,000 meters, almost instantly, get off the gondola, minimal touring to get out here. This is a place I go skiing with my girlfriend, who's like a total novice at this stuff. And so when I saw this min report, my jaw hit the floor a little bit because this is a big, scary avalanche for this terrain. It doesn't usually produce avalanches like this. There was another min post from this day, you can go find it, where someone dropped in and they ended up remote triggering something. So this is my bread and butter touring areas. And now we're seeing these deep, scary avalanches rip out. So what does that mean for me? It means I'm going to start choosing some really simple terrain. And you're not gonna see me out there trying to thread the needle nearly as much as winter, at least not for the next month or so. And I don't have good news. Like, we're moving into another high and dry period, which is going to likely create another facet layer. So we've got multiple facet layers in our snowpack. It's overall a bit thin. And the real cure for this would just be like a Pineapple Express or big southwesterly flow that would really put a lot of weight on this snowpack and clean it out, so to speak, but it's not happening. So I hate to be the wet towel on on everyone's hopes and dreams for the season. And it's not a total loss. It doesn't mean this is going to be like this forever. But as we move through the holiday season, this is a real tricky time. Acknowledge that, make your train choices accordingly. And huge thanks to Kai for submitting this min, so we can all get a good idea of what's happening out there. I'll open up to a few questions. We're just kind of approaching that hour-long mark. Sean Spielberg asked, what are the most dangerous aspects of skiing with a larger group? You just start to get that group thing going on, Sean. Like, have you ever been to a concert or out to the bar with, 2 people? Like, it gets a lot wilder when there's 6 involved. And you can start kind of heading in directions where not everyone's totally on board, but the whole group's doing it, and makes it a lot harder to speak up. It's a lot harder to control as well. So, a group of just me and one other person, I can say like, okay, I'm skiing to that tree. That's my safe zone. I'm gonna call you on the radio. We're gonna move from there. You start to get people scattered all over the place, or you get a group of sledders into a zone, and folks start like, we're saying like, okay, this is in play, this is out. But folks start tracking in different places. It's really easy to lose people. So I think that bigger groups are just harder to manage, and that's what makes them more dangerous. Dan asks, what makes this a 1 in 10 year start to the season? I don't know if it's a 1 in 10 year start, Dan. I don't know if it's a 1 in 25 year start, but what happened was, broadly speaking, we had that super warm and lovely fall. Like, I was out riding bikes, I think, until almost November, even into November a bit here in Revelstoke. And then we got that big shot of snow, and then it got really cold, and that faceted the upper snowpack. So we just had like this shimmering surface ore and this really rotten faceted snowpack. Then we had a big series of storms come online, and stormed through last week. Slab started to build, and then last weekend we started to see, like in this min observation that you see here, we started to see avalanches happen. There was an accident down on the southeast corner in Orkable near Fernie. I think that was just the tipping point. So now we're moving into a scenario where we've got basically a crap foundation, and we're putting a new load on it in the form of our house and new snow. So we just have we have a poor foundation, and now we're going to start putting load in the form of new snow or weight on it. And it's a bit of a house of cards. I wouldn't trust it. So that's what makes it a funny start. It might be worse than 1 in 10 years. Like, it's 1 in 10 year in my experience. It might be 1 in 25. I don't really know. And like, I don't want to be too much of a pessimist here either. Like, we get a couple big Pineapple Express, southwesterly flow that's really warm and wet, and like, this might all become a thing of the past after there's a big avalanche cycle. So winters are long. And I'm trying to read questions and talk at the same time. Winters are long, and like, we could have a great midwinter, we could have a great spring. So I don't want to be too much of a negative Nancy here, but like, just recognizing that right now it's sketchy. Recommendations for snowshoers for the season: easier or harder than for backcountry skiers? Depends. Really good question. I think it's just about knowing where your snowshoeing is going to take you. So, the one nice thing about snowshoeing is like, I think the goals for snowshoeing are different than ski touring or sledding. Like, the latter two tend to be pretty adrenaline focused and like wanting face shots. But I think you can go have a really nice day, just kind of like being in the Canadian wilderness, enjoying yourself on snowshoes. The real key is to go and look at the AITS rating, or the avalanche terrain exposure scale, for where you plan to go. If you're going to national parks, they're very well signed. There's lots of AITS information. There's AITS information on our website as well. And just, really making sure that you're not getting into that, your snowshoe day doesn't take you into the more challenging or complex terrain. It's pretty easy to stick to gentle terrain on snowshoes, which I think is great. So many good questions. We'll just roll through these. Yeah, thanks, Ian. Happy that you're stoked. This is a tough presentation because it's just people that are so close to doing anything right. Kevin Price, thanks for Tahoe. Appreciate the beta. Be up there in March at Weimar. Killer. Go to the Weimar Hotel for me. Have a beer. That place is wild. Similar layer, but now it's 2 meter deep under some wet. Yeah, so you're actually probably in a better place, Kevin, because when we were getting our big Omega block, which is how nerds talk about this big ridge of high pressure that was over the province, like all the action was going at you in Tahoe. So nice. I wish I was at Tahoe right now. I wish we had 2 meters of heavy wet snow between us and some of these persistent weak layers we're dealing with. Bradley Lamson, do you think people are relying more on technology, CalTOPO, Onyx, avalanche forecasts versus building a practical skill set beyond an AST2? Great question. Are we relying more on technology? Heck yeah. I mean, I am. Like, I love the tools that we can have with these mapping tools, and I'll overlay my trip plans in them. I'll put decision points in them. They're really good. To be totally honest, like not that many people take an AST2. In all of my avalanche training, far and away the most valuable avalanche training I ever got, because an AST1 really teaches you how to recognize avalanche terrain and avoid it. And the AST2 really gets you in there to really try and figure it out. Like, how do you make decisions? How do you plan a trip? So I just can't say enough good about an AST2. And if you're excited about this stuff and you want to plan better trips, like take an AST2. You can go to our website. Amy will probably drop a link in here about our list of providers. Like, take an AST2. If you've only taken an AST1, take an AST2. You know, think about it. If you've taken an AST2, think about a companion rescue course. Like, there's been so many people that have had accidents after companion rescue and really were only enabled to act these nice rescues because they had just recently trained. Like, train. I can't say it enough. Practice reasonable and realistic scenarios. So yeah, we're definitely relying on more and more on technology. Brent, I see you've appeared back there.
Yeah, Grant, like we got a couple questions in the Q&A box as well. And two of them
Okay,
are
let's
similar.
skip over there.
Talking about, you know, the ACE ratings with our trip planner and stuff. And they're curious how come there isn't as many in like for well-used areas like Glacier National Park, Yoho. And I know they do have some on the parks website and for some of those regions. And there's another person talking about, you know, are there going to be more ACE areas rated? You know, there's no snowshoers and stuff as well. And I thought that would be a good.
Yeah, no, it's really good. I think that in the next few years, you're actually going to see, we're very close to having algorithms that can actually go out and run ACE ratings for us with really good agreement to our professional ACE raters. So I don't think it's that far off. I'm kind of thinking like the next few years, like all the mountains of Western Canada will be ACE rated. And then we can layer better trip planning tools on top of that. That's really the kind of future of avalanche forecasting and some of what our mission at Avalanche Canada will be, like just better trip planning resources. So look for that from us. Yeah, more ACE ratings to come, but there are a lot of them out there for the popular spots too. Like vast majority of the managed snowmobile areas, the popular ski areas, like the ACE ratings are out there, and you can download them. You can download them from our site, then drop them into Gaia, Google Earth, whatever your jam is. Let me try and go find the Q&A, which is right here. Got it.
Yeah,
Answered.
Most of them in there. One other one was what is like considered conservative low angle terrain? Is that like 20 degrees, 25? Should we
Yeah, exactly.
like skiing for the next month?
I'm gonna be doing a lot of Nordic skiing for a while. I'm sure I'll still go do some touring too, but just not really speaking to me right now. Like, I really don't like being out there and being scared. And with these kind of conditions, I just think it's really challenging. Now I'm a little bit, I know there's other places where it's not quite as sketchy in the province. Like, I'm really talking a lot about what's happening around me here in Revelstoke. It looks like it's quite a different story if you're in the North Shore Mountains or Vancouver Island, or for that matter, other places further north. So if you're willing to travel to get out into some things that might not be quite as sketchy, you got that option. But yeah, I think that it's just, you know, I don't want to say stay out of the backcountry. That's not it at all. It's just, if you're heading into the backcountry, be really careful. Like, and what does that mean? It means choose simple terrain. And yeah, conservative terrain is like 30 and less. It's pretty conservative. Yeah, cool. 8 ratings for you to download there, which is great. The whole presentation was so sick. Cheers, Lauren. Appreciate it. Let me scan this a little bit more. No power for 3 days in Tahoe. Wow. Yeah, I touched on David's question. Cool. Thanks, Ian. Cheers. Cool. Okay.
Question from the floor. Someone's got their hand up here. So we're going to get Jordan. Go ahead and ask your question, Jordan. Or maybe it was a mistaken hand up.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to unmute myself there. I'm just wondering, how do we do the risk stratification and decide, do we accept more risk on more challenging and exposed terrain versus trying to choose more conservative terrain, but exposing ourselves to a longer time period in those sort of moderate risk zones? Thanks.
So you're just trying to figure out what the difference is.
It doesn't
Well,
seem like a linear equation, right? Like less
not.
time and more dangerous terrain could be like full consequence versus spending 4 times as long in moderate terrain may not also be better. I'm just kind of trying to figure that out. Thanks.
Yeah, good question. So it's like this old idea of if you want to get into this stuff, check out the conceptual model of avalanche hazard, and that's kind of what we as professionals use to determine what the given hazard and how that communicates into risk. It's available online. Amy can probably find it and drop it in there. But the short version of that is that, like, yeah, your example. So like, what do we want to do when we go out for a day? We're doing any kind of touring, no matter what. We want to actually try to spend most of our time when we're like really slow and vulnerable, like when we're skinning or snowshoeing, like walking up in the simple terrain and the lower hazard, because you're going to spend more time there, but it's going to be actually less risk because you're less likely to encounter an avalanche. And then when you're like all buckled down, moving really fast, like that's the time when you might choose to drop into a line, because you're able to move faster, get out of the way, that kind of thing. But in terms of just like choosing what you're going to do for a day when we have conditions like this, I think that you've really got to look at it and decide, like, look at the avalanche problem. So like, I'll just make a quick example of it, like zoom into the region that I'm in right now and look at the avalanche problems. This guy actually go full screen here so you can all see them. So I think that, like, looking at this, the headline, we now have 2 concerning persistent weak layers within our snowpack, soon to be 3. If triggered, avalanches may step down to deeper layers, resulting in large destructive avalanches. Use extra caution, back off quickly. Like, so I guess you first decide, like, is this something you want to go out and deal with? An avalanche? Let's just look at our avalanche problem here. So we have a 30 to 50 centimeter deep persistent slab above 5 millimeters of surface source. So like, I think that you want to ask yourself, like, are you willing to go out there and trigger a 30 to 50 centimeter deep slab? I'm not. And then when you make it a little bit more complicated, as it is here, a second weak layer of surface soil and facets from November is buried 60 to 90 centimeters down. And the layer continues to catch professionals and recreationists off guard with numerous large human triggered avalanches. I think that's what you really have to evaluate in terms of, what your risk threshold is. Like, does this sound like something you want to go out and deal with? And that if you're wrong, are you willing to then deal with the consequences of a 30 to 90 centimeter deep slab? I'm not. I just don't feel like I know that I'm good, but I know that, 99 times out of 100, I make the right decision. Like, I've got a career based on this stuff that still leaves, even if I'm that good, and I'm probably not, I'm probably more like 97 out of 100 that still leaves 3 days in 100 where I'm going to make the wrong call. And if I'm going to make the margin of error is that I have to then deal with the consequences of a deep persistent slab avalanche problem, like, this just doesn't sound that good. So when I see an avalanche forecast like this with a persistent slab problem, I'm just thinking to myself, like, it's on all aspects, it's on all elevations. What do I do about that? Like, it just doesn't speak to me, honestly. I'm not that psyched on going out and going touring on these days. But if I felt like, I want to go just like for a big, gentle walk, I might go choose to just walk up a gentle ridgeline and just enjoy like the simpler aspects of being in the mountains without feeling like I need to like get into the steeps. I might just go like skip around on ridge lines, avoiding cornices, but just really looking for islands of safety and choosing really simple terrain. So I think that's where I'm at, but like also some really good writing out there. And if it's not my role to tell you what your risk threshold is. Like that may be within your risk threshold. And it's like, I celebrate that with you. Because I was definitely there at other times. Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, lots of killer questions. I really appreciate everyone being around tonight, sticking with us for an hour. Probably a pretty good place to leave it.
Yeah, I think you've covered pretty much all the questions, Grant. We didn't have any, unknowns yet. So if anybody has a last question there, you can pop it in right quickly. Other than that, Grant, thank you so much. That's an in-depth presentation. It sounds like you got a lot of good feedback, people taking some tools away. There's a lot to think about when you're out there, folks. Remember the other thing is, the mountains aren't going away. They'll be there over and over. And if you can't get there this month or this week, they're going to be there next year, the year after. Super appreciate you lending your time to us, Grant. You're a busy guy, and I hope everyone out there, thank you for your time as well. Before you go away, Amy's got some prizes. So she's picked some names out of the old participation list there, and let's see who the winners are.
Yes, we have 3 prizes tonight. The first is this toque from Arc'teryx, and that one goes to Kim Matheson. The next is this also Arc'teryx wool balaclava that goes to Susanna Zach. And the last prize for the night is this toque here, also Arc'teryx, that goes to Carlos Enriquez. And I'll pop your names and the email in the chat so you can send us a message and we'll get those prizes to you.
Excellent. Congrats, everybody. Super thanks for that, Amy. And yeah, we're just going to kind of wrap things up here now, folks. There's tons of resources on our website. I just see a whole bunch of black squares on there. Pardon me. We've got a couple overlapping windows. There's tons of resources on our website to help you learn more about avalanche safety and how to plan your trips in the backcountry. Grant talked a lot about our trip planner. If you're just starting backcountry education, definitely check out our online avalanche tutorial, Avi Savvy. And even if you are educated, go and check it out, brush up your skills. Like Grant says, practice, practice, practice. If you got the gear, fully understand how to use it properly, effectively, efficiently, because when it comes down to it, you really need to have your wits about you. We super appreciate your interest in avalanche safety tonight. All you folks, you can support essential programs here at Avalanche Canada for donating as little as $10. If you can afford it and would like to help, please click on a link in the chat box. Amy's going to drop that in there. Our next webinar, next Thursday, January 5th, choosing terrain for snowmobilers. It's a fun interactive session. It's going to help you assess how to choose terrain depending on the conditions. Tell all your friends, spread the word about these webinars, folks. If you did miss one or your friends did, they're all available on our website as well. Pre-registration is required for all these. And thank you all for spending the time with us tonight and showing your interest in safety. And we hope you enjoy your winter in the backcountry, safe from avalanches. Have yourself a good night and take care.